Good afternoon, folks. If I could invite the other panelists to come up one by one. So we're very honored today to have Morocco's Minister of Trade and Industry, His Excellency Riyad Mansour. He would like to join me on stage. We also have joining us today Lord Mark Malloch-Brown. Let me also invite to the stage Arturo Franco, and Heike Helmgart from the EBRD, and Samaila Zubairu from the Africa Finance Corporation. Sorry, I didn't realize he was going to be here. Monsieur Serge, please do join us on stage. Monsieur Serge Ekwe, welcome as well. So throughout the Mo Ibrahim weekend, we've heard about Africa's aspirations. We've heard of all the ways in which each country of the region can mobilize finance domestically and aspire to an Africa-wide growth. This afternoon, we're going to look at the international setting for that to take place. And of course, that international setting has been changing more rapidly than before in the last 2 or 3 months. The United States has turned away from its alliances, trust building, and rules and institutions, and opted for a foreign policy which is far more bilateral, using coercive means to extract concessions from countries one by one. And that leaves countries on this continent with a serious question. Do you line up one by one to be, to quote Mo Ibrahim this morning, to be eaten alive in the White House? Or do you come together with other countries as you set out to navigate the emerging global disorder? And that's going to be crucial for the continent. And this afternoon, we're going to go through 4 important opportunities for countries across the continent of Africa. The first is to think about with whom they want to be in a coalition when they approach not just the US, China, but all other regions of the world. The second is how they're going to attract finance from the rest of the world and how the rest of the world can help them in that endeavor. The third is how they're going to deal with external debt, which the fabulous fact book that you've all received and read, I know, tells us of the countries on the continent whose debt is now at 50% of GDP, others at an average of 25%. So an external debt crisis is going to need a framework to resolve it. And finally, what a new, better international financial architecture for the continent might look like. And we have a fantastic panel here today to give us the answers to this. What I will promise to you is I will try to keep the panelists away from telling us about what the problem is, and I will try to get them focused on what the paths forwards are and what the solutions are. And I'm going to beg your indulgence, panelists, if I rudely interrupt you in that aim for the audience today. But I would like to start with a minister from our host country, His Excellency Minister of Trade and Industry, Riyad Manzoor, who trained as an engineer and has come through up into the Ministry of Trade and Industry. Minister, not just Morocco, but all other countries on the continent, many represented here, are having to think about who should their allies be and what coalitions should they be part of to navigate the new world order. What would your answer be? Does Morocco, or not just Morocco, but do you see countries of the continent needing to engage more with the BRICS, more with the G20, more? How do you see the coalitions?
Thank you very much for this question, which is a tough question, to be honest. Well, first of all, I would quote my predecessor, which is one of my mentors. And his first question is, can you count? He says, yes, I can count. 1, 2, 3. Yes, can you really count? Sure, I can count. Then count on yourself. This is the first thing we need to understand. There are no real allies. There are only interests. And at the end of the day, we need to look at our best interests. The second aspect of this situation is we are the kid in the room. We are 20 years old on average as Africans, and we have our parents fighting 45 against 45 against each other to determine who's going to be the boss of the world. Fair enough. Is it time for us to make a choice? Surely not. Third aspect of the question is that it has never been a fair world for Africa, to be honest, even in the former setup. And we need to take the opportunity of this resetting of all this institution, of all this global world order, to find a better space. So the challenge for us is not who, is not whom, is not with whom, is to find a better space as a solution for the world. And I believe the best positioning we should have now, and this is counting on ourselves, is to be part of the solution, is to be part of this reset, is to offer what we have to offer in order to grow, in order to give a better life to our population, in order to finally be able to deliver our projects. Be it with the BRICS, be it with the US, be it with Europe, be it by our own. This is not the question. Whoever is keen to support us on this journey is welcome.
Right, but that doesn't answer to us what the mid-station is between showing up in the White House on your own or presenting a case to the US and to China and to other regions in concert with other countries. Would that be the African Union, or would that be a combination?
Whatever. Even in Africa, tariffs are not the same for different countries. So everyone has a different relationship with the US. So I'm going to show up, what for? I'm at 10%. I'm in deficit with the US. I mean, I have a free trade agreement with the US, strategic partnership with the US. I'm in a good position with the US, and I'm happy with the situation with the US. I don't have to be in a coalition with any other country that has a difficulty. I can support, I can say, no, this is unfair for my brother country, but my interest is to maintain this position and to be in the safe side as a country. Then, for sure, I have allies. I have customers. For example, my main customers, unfortunately for the moment, are in Europe. So I need to support the position of Europe because I need a healthier Europe to be able to buy my goods. I have my allies in the continent, and I need to support my allies in the continent. But first of all, to determine the map of my interests as a country, and then to act accordingly.
Well, Well, let me come to Serge Ekoué, who's president of the West African Development Bank. Do you have a different view of that? Do you think at least West African countries should try to hold together?
Well, again, I do agree with the minister that each and every country has to define its own paradigm and defend its own interests. That is very clear. However, the good thing in the situation in which we are, which is a situation by which bilateralism would supersede multilateralism. I think from certain aspects, it's a good thing. It's a good thing for Africa. I think our common market would be definitely boosted, enhanced. We need to find ways to make sure that, when we ship goods from China to Africa, which is today the case, and we have to make sure that it would be a little bit more complicated than shipping goods from Mombasa to Lagos. So our priority is to make sure that whenever we ship anything from Casablanca to Lagos, it's easier. And the reality is it has to become easier. We have a common market of 1.2.3 billion consumers. In West Africa, it's more than 400 million consumers. In the countries under our remit here, our population doubles every generation with a median age of 20 years old. Mm-hmm. It is a fantastic engine of growth, fantastic. Mm-hmm. We are in the most efficient, we are the motor, the engine of the world. No matter what people say, we are the engine of the world. And this engine of the world is what we have to rely on. The world itself is an aging population. There are countries that even do not regenerate its population. We have the energy, we have the means and the tools to conquer the world. So the very situation in which we are today, for me, it is, and it has to be seen as an opportunity for our countries and the banks in our countries to fund our development in safer ways.
So let me ask you, why does the rest of the world not see that? Why do the credit rating agencies impose what some call an Africa premium on the continent?
Okay, let's focus on facts, datas, simple datas. Our Africa is the less risky continent of the world from a data perspective. That is very clear. However, I do agree with you, the perception agencies do have is different. So we have to work together with my brothers Samaila and the other heads of financial institutions, banks, to make sure that we add up our capital, we add up our balance sheet, we fund domestically our development, either for the public or for the private sector. And then we will change the narrative. So for me, it's not only a political statement. We have to prove things on the ground. And again, coming back to what I said earlier, when you stick to the facts, in French we say les faits sont têtus. C'est les lignes, ça me semble-t-il. So let's stick to the facts. I think we're working on the re-engineering, the new definition of a framework of coalition of regional continental banks under the leadership of the African Development with his new president, Dr. Sidi Ould Tah. We'll redefine that. We will add up our balance sheet. We'll make sure that we share pipelines, we share the product, we syndicate together, we exchange risks. For example, today, there's no way for me to swap, to offset, I would say, Togolese risk with Namibia, but I think tomorrow this will be possible. Offsetting offloading risk. These are the kind of things we know how to do, and we will certainly do that.
Thank you. And it's got echoes of what Vera Songwe was saying on the previous panel. Let me come to Samaila Zubairu. You've come from the private sector, setting up a boutique investment firm, to the African Finance Corporation, doing regional finance. Why do you think the rest of the world doesn't see the facts as Monsieur Ekwe says it? Why do you think there is this Africa premium? Or perhaps you think there isn't really a premium, but is there a premium? Are African countries penalized for something more than an assessment of the risks of their macroeconomic policy and political risk?
Thank you for that question, and thanks to the Mo Ibrahim Foundation for convening us and for the fantastic lineup of speakers and the amazing research they put out. And thanks to our hosts for hosting us. We've been well received. Thanks for that. So your question is an important one, but I think it requires some context. And the context is that, everybody has said it, and it is true, that Africa is a growth frontier. But that growth frontier needs to be proved. We have to, intentionally demonstrate that we are a viable investment proposition. We have to move from talking about the potential to the actual opportunity, and we have to demonstrate the returns that have been achieved by ourselves as financiers, by our contemporaries in other multilateral financial institutions, and by our entrepreneurs that have built several businesses and are scaling it. So the whole idea of risk perception has several components. The first one is there's a whole macro view about risk, which we know in some cases is not so good, and that's just fact. But what is the rate of that in relation to things like liquidity, and then things like the actual entity, So there are various layers of risk, And I think what we need to do is to use data, like we've all discussed, to demonstrate that the default rate, in Africa is not as high. I think the only region with a lower default rate than Africa is the Middle East or the Gulf countries. Africa has the same default rate with Western Europe. We need to prove that. We don't not just talk about it, we need to prove that. And we also need to prove that because of how we overstructure and how we over-collateralize in Africa, even when you say there's a loss, there is significant recovery. And I say this from my experience. We had a bad case in one of our assets, but we recovered 89% of the principal and interest. Of course, we had received interest before in the past, so the amount of loss is limited. And this is an asset. This is when you do the stats about the loss, the default, you would consider this particular asset within that bucket of default. But we have recovered 89% of the investment and the interest. So we need to demonstrate, this fact. And I know that several people here
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you for one sec. Can I just check? Is it a communication problem, or is it an underlying outcomes problem? Because I hear you saying we need to demonstrate the results, but also saying the results are already there. The default rates are the lowest around. So are you saying the results are already there, but they're just not being communicated to the outside world?
Certainly.
So what would that take?
And we need people to share the data. So, I was at the B20, G20 summit in South Africa earlier in the year. And I think a representative from the IFC, mentioned that they actually have some of their best returns from Africa, and that the returns from Africa are better than S&P 500 over the same period. Mm-hmm. She also corroborated the fact that where they have losses, the recovery is significant. She mentioned something like 70-something% or even 80%. So these facts are there. We're just not communicating it well enough. I was talking to Jendaya yesterday, Fraser, I think she's here somewhere, and she was telling me that we needed to work more together, to do this. I mean, I had this whole prejudice premium as a big concern, and I was discussing about it, and I was trying to see what can we do to change it. It just occurred to me that what we need to do is just provide information. We just need to ensure that the data is out there about the default rates and about the performing assets and the return on the performing assets. I think it's more significant to demonstrate that we do have good returns. If I look at an institution like ourselves, we know we've grown significantly, and we continue to be profitable. In fact, we have a lot more capital retained from our profitability than most other multilateral development banks. So we have to constantly prove that Africa is profitable and that there are several examples of profitable African enterprises. That's the way we demystify and we remove the perception. It's just about showing returns.
Thank you. So let me come to Heike Helmgart, who's been at the EBRD, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, for the last 18 years. And you've been part of that bank's development of its business across this continent. So just picking up from the other three panelists, do you think that the problem is communication? Are these wonderful results that your fellow panelists have spoken about just not being, the credit rating agencies are just not seeing them? External investors are just failing to read the reports. Is that the problem? Is that how you see it at the EBRD? And can the EBRD help attract private sector investment into the continent?
I do believe that part of it is telling the narrative, part of it is communication, part of it is getting the data and the information out. I mean, we're the new kid on the block, so we want to use our voice to the more experienced voices on this panel to add, but also it's about zooming in and getting a bit more the differentiated view of the different roles of successes on the continent. And so people excuse me, but we are in the country that will host jointly the Football World Cup. So I want to use a football metaphor to really also explain the different roles and maybe where there are some shortcomings and why we don't shoot enough goals at the end. So I think really the private sector, the African enterprises and the global enterprises that want to invest in this continent, they are the strikers. They just want to score goals. And what we need to do in the midfield, like all this liquidity, we need to make sure that there's a flow of the game so that really the balls, like the trade finance, the short passes get forward, but also the really long-term passes really get forward to the strikers to really have the goals. And then I think what the rating agencies are the commentators. So they are the commentators of the game. And who of us has not watched a football game with a bad commentator? It's terrible. You really think, oh my God, you really ruined this beautiful game because you don't understand what's happening on the field. So I think it is really also about having the rating agency being, the commentators that we deserve for a good game. But also, of course, we don't want the rating agency to shoot any goals because they just, interfere with anyone. And then the governments, we really see the governments just should make sure that they actually have the rules of the game, the referees, so that the game can develop. So also, we don't want the governments we see too many state-owned enterprises that want to shoot goals, where actually the private sector should really be the ones making sure that the goals get into the field. So I think this is helpful to just being in the country where, and okay, I'm German, so I'm a football fan, but is when we look at it, how we can tell the story better of the different roles, so the private sector, but also, why did the pass not reach them? Why was the financing not the right one to actually enable the perfect corner shot? And why was the last line of defense, the central bank governor in the goal, not making sure that there is, no own goals? So I think if we look at all of this and then make sure that we communicate, coming back to your communication story, communicate actually the beauty of the game better, I think this will help to get more liquidity, to get better flow, to get better also physio onto the strikers so that they will run faster to shoot more goals. So I think it's many of these dimensions, but I think it is also zooming in, and I hope we can add, as the new kid on the block and maybe fellow football fans, our voice to the game of Africa.
Thank you. Can I come back to you, Minister Messour? Do you feel that the football commentary on Morocco's economic performance is fair? Morocco does an extraordinary job, including you and your fellow ministers, in communicating the successes of the Moroccan economy. Do you think the rest of the world hears what you're saying? And if so, do you have tips for other African countries about how they should do it?
We don't have any tips. We are here available to support our brothers from Africa. But the message of His Majesty yesterday was clear. 4 aspects that were clearly defined. We need to do our homeworks. And first of all, we need to count on our own resources, and we had a strong debate here around this. Second, we need to work on governance, we need to work on trust, we need to work on all what makes our message more accepted and more supported. Third, we need to work a little bit more together, more intra-trade and trade collectively together. And fourth, we need to give more value to our products. And this message was completely clear. But now, the devil is in the details. We tell our story in a fair way. I'll give you an example. Agencies say whatever they said, but the last time we borrowed 2 billion euros and we went for a roadshow and we had 3.5 times subscription from what we asked, and we had it at a lower rate than a country from the European Union asking for the same money. Morocco had it. So we can have it. We can have access to money. We can have access to money at a fair price. The problem is doing our homework, doing it right, providing trust. Money is like water. It needs to know its way back. Default rate are not important, but they are there sometimes and unpredictable. And time is money too, so recovering the money with collateral is not recovering it the way they want it to be recovered. And the third thing, and I think the most important thing about that, is we are too small. We don't have enough big projects. No. So it's like you have a small team of 15 people, they're having 100 projects with billions of dollars, and you're having 100 small projects, $1 million each. It's too much time. It's too much time for them. So we need to scale up. We need to be more ambitious in our projects. And as soon as we have really interesting projects, you see a lot of interest from providers and from people that want to finance it directly.
Thank you. So a big message that echoes this morning's message about countries needing to do their own homework, rely on their own resources, etc. Nevertheless, countries on this continent, as on other continents, are hit by things well outside of their control. Financial crises that take place in Europe or in the United States, tariffs and trade shocks, exchange rate volatility driven by other large powers in the world, security crises in other parts of the world, which challenge both financial flows, food flows, energy flows to the continent. And it's for that reason that this continent needs to think about the international architecture and the international institutions and how much and how supportive they can be to countries on the continent. So I'd like to turn to our last 2 panelists for their views on this. Let me start with Arturo Franco. Originally from Mexico, he was in government in Nuevo León for a period before joining McKinsey and then joining MasterCard and then moving with Ajay Banga to the World Bank. So, and I say all that, Arturo, because you've come from private sector organizations that are very client responsive, that know how to listen to their customers. And you've come to an institution that many people on this continent feels doesn't listen to them and needs to be more responsive. So just your personal reflections as somebody who's used to working in a client responsive organization and you arrived in the World Bank, if I gave you a magic wand, what would you do to the World Bank to make it more responsive to what its African members would like from it?
Hire more Moroccans.
Hire more
Moroccans.
Hire more Moroccans.
Yeah, it's like an 80-year-old question. No, thank you, Naira. Thank you to the Foundation for the invitation. I'm very, very happy to be here. It's such a pleasure to be in such a dynamic discussion, and Mo keeps it real, and I'm going to try to live up to that spirit. I'm turning 2 years at the World Bank, so I can still vaguely remember my life before that. But a little known fact is I actually had a first stint at the bank almost 20 years ago as a young development economist, fresh out of grad school. So in a way, it's a bit of a homecoming for me. I want to follow up on your football analogy. I think the multilateral system plays an important role in keeping the league going. And in particular, the World Bank group, I think, helps the teams that are lagging behind, tries to support them into getting better at the game and their companies scoring more goals. And so that's how I would think of the World Bank. You also talked about things that happen that are exogenous to Africa. Joe Stiglitz had a phrase about the World Bank calling it the quintessential global public goods institution that could solve collective problems that no country or region can solve on their own. And I think from that perspective, it is relatively hard to think about the World Bank in a competitive way because it plays some unique roles that a multinational corporation would not play. But I think it is, and I've been doing it over the last 2 years, a very useful exercise to think about the World Bank from the client perspective. Like, why would a country sign up to work with the World Bank? And thinking about it from the client perspective, as any consumer knows, there are 3 things that we think about when we choose an iPhone versus an Android, when we choose MasterCard over Visa, when we choose Harvard over Oxford. And those 3 things are price, value, and customer service. And so, just very quickly, in price, the 76 or so countries that are IDA eligible, the fund that the World Bank Group has for the poorest, lowest income countries in the world, it is by far the most concessional money that these countries can get. It is, by construction, 20% grants. And on top of that, when countries face debt vulnerabilities or climate vulnerabilities or other kinds of vulnerabilities, there's even more help and support that is...
Can Arturo, I'm
yes.
going to jump in. Because a lot of people in this room will be saying, yeah, but it takes months and months to get approved.
I'll get to customer satisfaction.
Oh, no, I want you to jump to this right now, because
okay.
This is the thing I hear most in countries on the continent. They say, the World Bank is so slow. Now, of course, it's not the World Bank staff alone's fault.
Yeah.
It is because the member countries, the creditor countries, require so many safeguard processes. I accept that. But tell us what you're doing and what the new management in the bank is doing to get those loans out the door much faster.
So Ajay's first internal target for the World Bank staff was to take a 19-month average project preparation down to 12 months. And we're about halfway there in 2 years. And this hasn't happened in decades. Actually, it's been building up to 19 months. So in 2 years, I think we're at 26% of reduction of the time from an idea to the loan being given. And we've actually had our first set of loans that lasted 30 days from inception to funding. And so clearly, with a client-focused mentality, speed is of the essence.
And how are you doing that? How are you achieving that? Because the previous World Bank president kept promising it and nothing happened. So what's changed? What have you changed that's getting the money out the door faster?
I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but I think it is about replicability and not starting from scratch every time. I want to talk about the value proposition because, let's say, on IDA, there's no question about price. As we move up the chain to middle-income countries like South Africa for what we call IBRD, as we move into our private sector arms, MIGA, and the IFC, it is a more competitive market for us, not just competing with other regional and development banks, but also competing with private banks. Countries now are finding that they have more access to private capital markets that don't come with all of these safeguards and all of the kind of related nuisance. But we think that we still can compete because part of the value proposition of the World Bank is that it's not just a money bank. It is also a knowledge bank. Our global expertise, our 80 years of experience in doing these types of projects on health and infrastructure and education and job creation, that's part of the package. And it's not priced in, but it is part of the package. We're also a capacity building bank. We just launched a series of World Bank academies. Actually, we are celebrating, and many of you will probably know in this continent, 10 years of the African Centers of Excellence, which have trained thousands of young STEM Africans in every field imaginable, which is a public good in itself. That's all priced in. So if you don't think of the full value proposition, it is very easy to go and say, oh, you're very slow, or you're very expensive.
Well, to be fair, that's what the clients say. And let me just come to Mr. Zubairu and Mr. Ekwe to say, how long does it take each of your institutions to prepare a loan? Monsieur Ekwe, how long?
That is, we usually take it depends, but less than a year.
Less than a year?
Yeah.
Monsieur Zubairu?
Of course, it depends on the transaction. For us, it can be between 90 days to sometimes 2 years, sometimes 3 years. Because if we're working on a whole 800-kilometer rail line from northwest Zambia to Luakano in Angola, it's 3.5, 4 years. So it depends on the project. If you want to do an acquisition or you want to increase your project, you want to grow from where you are with cash flows, maybe 90 days, 120 days. So it depends.
And in the EBRD?
Sorry.
I think sort of on the average, I think I would also probably be with Sumailo that very broad from sort of literally 80 days to 2 years. But what I want to say is what helps if there is a capital market transaction. Because, for example, actually in Morocco, we did a capital markets with a state-owned rail company, a green capital markets bond. So if the capital markets in these countries put pressure on, so this is the day the bond has to go out, we are all anchor investors, that really helps. And I think that really helps to discipline all of us, that helps us to be as efficient as possible to get the information right, because we know we need to be there on that moment, on that day. Suddenly our committees meet on days they usually don't meet. Suddenly, sign-offs can be achieved within, 20 minutes. So it's interesting.
So Heike, to all the national officials in the room, what are you saying they need to do to get the loan from any of you out the door faster?
I think really focus on the capital markets is actually a good tip, because a lot of entities can raise money on your capital markets. It's good for the domestic economy, and it's good for keeping all of us on our toes.
Absolutely, yes.
So I just want to say, I think that it is very important not to be reductionist on an average time frame. It doesn't just vary by the risk or the size of the loan. There's a huge difference between public and private and the different arms of the World Bank. And in the public side, because we are client serving, because the client has to ask for the money, the World Bank is not pushing out projects. We are supporting countries. We are creating a country partnership framework, which is a contract between the World Bank, a vision for the country that the country signs off on, and then they are the ones who decide on which projects to move on. While we are creating those projects, it is like a chess game. There's a moment where you stop your clock, and then it goes to the other side. We're counting most of that time as part of the time frame. So it needs to go through parliaments, it needs to go through ministries, it needs to be signed off by a president. So it's not a blame thing. It is we're doing everything we can to be faster, and we will continue to do so. I think actually the focus should be on the effectiveness of the spending and the investment and the impact, and I'd love to talk about the impact side. But just on customer service, we're doing a lot of things. We're doing joint representation between IFC and the World Bank in countries so that you have one conversation instead of two conversations. We are decentralizing all of our regional vice presidents back into the regions. They were in Washington having very, very fun lives there. We were reframing how we do the country partnership. So we're doing a lot on cost.
Lots happening to make the World Bank more responsive. Let me now come to our final panelist, Mark Malloch-Brown, who has worked in the World Bank, in the UNDP, in the United Nations as the right-hand man of Kofi Annan, as some would have put it. Mark, even a year ago, we would have been having a discussion in this room about, as indeed there was a smidgen of this morning, about more African voice in different organizations. But now we're looking at a world where people are saying a lot of these organizations are going to be defunded and disappear. So let me put a really easy question to you. To African governments in this room, which ones, in your view, should they be most concerned about saving? Should they be most concerned continue to operate and continue to be funded?
Nari, thanks. And I'm not going to be able to end this answer without having made some enemies, which I'm sure is your plan. Look, I think you have to start with the proposition, and it's been running through the whole of this weekend, that successful development starts and ends with one thing: strong, determined, consistent country leadership. We're meeting in Morocco, which is an example of that over many decades. And so you work back from that. Which agencies do you need to support you in that endeavor? And if you start at, if you like, the sort of bottom of the ladder in the sort of fragile and weak states, then it is really important for those states that the remaining ODA is primarily concentrated on them, both in the form of humanitarian support in a country like Sudan, to grant finance in the case of states which are at peace, but which do not have the economic capacity to borrow in any plausible way. So for them, preserving an effective UN system, particularly around the humanitarian piece, is critical. For the as you go up the ladder, though, the needs change. And I think one consequence of what has happened is that development finance for lower middle and middle income countries, right upwards, going forwards, is going to be largely on loan bases. Concessional loans, we hope. And in order to preserve that system, you need the full network of not just the World Bank, but the regional development banks, the national and sub-regional development institutions, the whole ecosystem, because the burden on it is only going to increase. We are moving into a world where minus ODA, this post-ODA environment, affordable development finance on predictable long-term terms is going to be key. And then you've got to manage all the issues around it. Proper debt restructuring when it's necessary, systems for managing currency risk, et cetera, et cetera. But for these countries, preserving that development finance ecosystem and seeing it built out is going to be a much more plausible path forward than going cap in hand to the minister in London or Washington and hoping for more ODA. We've moved beyond that world, and I think the real message of this weekend was, while it is tragic in the short term for everybody affected by health cuts, etc., it is a future which, for different reasons, I think we all embrace as necessary, and if done right, offering predictable long-term finance to support countries in their development choices.
So, you didn't make any enemies there, Mark. Which ones are you proposing to get rid of?
The UN, for example, continues to, rightly, and I was administrator of UNDP, so I know it directly, continues to imagine a major role for itself in development. I think there will remain a role in development policy and technical assistance, but in terms of volume finance, It is going to rest on institutions which can lend. And that is the institutions represented on a panel like this.
I'm going to come down through the panel and then I'm going to turn to you for questions. And I'd like each of you, except the Minister, to answer, in 5 years' time, what do you hope is the way your organization is supporting the continent, is supporting countries on the continent? Just one line for you each. In 5 years' time, what's your best vision of how your organization will be supporting countries on the continent? And then I'm going to come to the Minister, who's very diplomatic, but we'll try and get him to be undiplomatic and ask him, who does he think his best partner will be as a country from these organizations in 5 years' time? So, starting with Monsieur Ekwe, the West African Development Bank.
Thank you. I don't want to leave this panel frustrated. The elephant in the room here is the origination. We have discussed this time to disbursement, and the underlying assumption was that it was taking too long. And I would agree with this, but the problem is, and again, it's the elephant in the room, is that the stronger the origination is, the shorter the time to disbursement is. But implementing in a development bank an originate to distribute operating model, it is brand new for development banks, which is basically not the case for private investment banks. So implementing the originate to distribute business model would by definition reduce largely the time to disbursement and therefore highly enhance our capacity to be efficient. And you're asking me in 5 years' time, I'm just willing that our organizations are just better organized and much more efficient. And when it comes to efficiency, it's very simple. If we cannot change people's lives, then we're useless. The only way of changing people's lives is to make sure that any intervention we're making has impact on their life. And the way to impact people's lives is cash. And as you know, investment. And as you know, cash is king.
And so where will origination be in 5 years' time?
The origination is the closer we are to action, the closer we are sitting with either the public or the private sector, defining what are the projects, how to structure a project, how to structure the funding, what the former president of the AFDB used to say, how to make project bankable, all right? And on three basics, and I will stop here, three basic elements. The first one is our capacity to replicate. What applies and what is useful in Togo, one can guess that could be equally replicable in either Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, Benin, or whatever. This is one. The second thing is restructuring. When you work on a 300 megawatt project, one can reckon that in 2 or 3 years' time, you will work on 500 megawatt project. But if you know the project, if you have been originating the project by yourself, then the time to disbursement, by definition, will be shorter. All right? And the third element is how to restructure. So, first thing, how do we replicate? Second thing, how to enhance? And then third thing, how do we restructure?
Thank you very much. Samaira Zubairu, how will the African Finance Corporation in 5 years' time, best case scenario, be supporting growth across Africa?
So I think the best way to start this is to remind ourselves that Africa is a compelling growth frontier with significant urbanization, industrialization, mineral transformation, and regional integration opportunity. So my view is the best way we can be supportive is to help African countries capture and retain more value, make the Continental Free Trade Area a reality in which goods made in Africa are traded within the region, build the infrastructure that integrates the continent, and use locally sourced material for that construction. So for example, we're working on an 800-kilometer rail line between Zambia and Angola. Maybe I'm not going to be able to use steel from Africa, but the next rail line we're going to build has to be with steel from Africa. Mm-hmm. We have this huge urbanization opportunity. It can't be that we're importing aluminum from China. We have to transform the bauxite in Africa into alumina and alumina in Africa for use to unleash the urbanization opportunity that we have. We must ensure that this whole conversation around visa travel or traveling to Europe, before you come down to Africa, ends. So it is in supporting countries, institutions, and enterprises to make that change. And we can do this by ensuring that African capital is available to finance this. I keep saying that we have to finance our development. It is only when we finance our development that we can demonstrate the potential, as a real investment proposition that people can replicate. So for me, 5 years from now is a lot more African capital working on Africa, a lot more African ports built, a lot more steel mills built, a lot more alumina refineries built, a lot more, aviation hubs built on the continent.
So showing results, infrastructure, and adding value in country. I hope you're all taking...
And of course, creating jobs.
So that in 2 years' time, we can ask these gentlemen how far they've got in this journey.
So right now, we've created about maybe 70,000 jobs. In 5 years, we might have created maybe 600,000.
There we go. Brilliant.
Thank
you. Arturo, in 5 years' time, the World Bank will be...
Yeah, so I think you alluded to this before, it's showing up in the right way. I think there's two kind of long-held aspirations, and Mark will probably remember one, is that we are a very unique institution in the sense that we can do everything from upstream policy reform and diagnosis to basic infrastructure to more targeted investments in many areas to the private sector arm of the World Bank. So we have everything that development could need in one institution. But it doesn't work when we don't work as one institution. So in 5 years' time, my first hope would be that our client countries in Africa and everywhere in the world can actually feel the difference, can feel the World Bank as one group where we are breaking all the silos between us so that we can show a more compelling proposition to our clients. I think the second is related. There's always been this idea that we're not a money bank, we're a knowledge bank, and that there is relevant experiences, sometimes tacit knowledge that needs to be replicated, sometimes it's codified in some sort of report, sometimes we need to bring the experts in, but that there is global knowledge at our disposal and local relevance. And the combination of global knowledge and local relevance, it is kind of the sweet spot for an organization like the World Bank. It has never really happened. The incentives have always pushed away from bringing the best of the world with the best of our local understanding of the context and driving results. So that would be my second wish, that we finally crack that one. And I think the third one, Ajay is pushing the organization to be more ambitious, but in a different way that other presidents have done. It's not more ambitious in terms of larger volumes. It's more ambitious in terms of impact, and credible impact, and measurable time-bound impact. The best example that I can think of that here is our Mission 300, our mission to electrify 300 million people with the Africa Development Bank and with many other partners, the Rockefeller Foundation, GIAP, and others, in 5 years. So my hope is that in 5 years we are celebrating that we didn't just hit the target, but that we went beyond the target, and that mission becomes the way that the World Bank works.
Fantastic. Heike, just one moment. I'm going to skip to Mark for a second, because Arturo's first was getting the World Bank to work as one when it's 4 or 5 different agencies. You sat in the United Nations as the United Nations tried to work as one, and as I recall, it didn't work out very well. Not your fault at all, but it didn't work out so well for the UN. So what would your word of advice be to the World Bank as they try to do what the UN tried to do for a decade?
Well, I mean, I think the advice is keep trying, because, you know, the UN is going to pay a heavy price for not having done that. And, you know, the current budget pressures it's under will force it to try again, is forcing it to try again, but in rather less propitious circumstances, because this time it's seen as a sort of reaction to budget cuts, rather than, as Amina Mohammed has argued, an overdue reform to get a more efficient system. I mean, I think I come back to my central point. We all need to, we the outside development actors, need to organize ourselves into as simple and client-friendly a system as possible in order to support countries and the choices they want to make in development. And any complexity, any overreach on our part, which gets in the way of that, just simply gets in the way of successful development.
Thank you. Heike, the EBRD in 5 years' time, what would the most brilliant version of it look like for African countries?
So I think that's actually just one or the same word 3 times. So I think local, local, local. I think I want to have local teams. So I think big office in Lagos, Nairobi, Cotonou, Abidjan, Dakar, and Accra to really add to the offices we already have in Casablanca, Cairo, and Tunis. So really having teams on the ground with talent that knows the market, but then also local capital markets, local currency funding, investments in sort of local value chains, investments in capturing more value in manufacturing locally, investing in local energy transition depending on the local conditionality. So I think for me that's sort of the hallmark is, have we achieved that in 5 years? Have we really created this local value with local talent and with presence on the ground?
Thank you. Minister Mazur, how does that sound to you? Did they, if I gave you a magic wand over these organizations which could offer real help to countries on the continent, what would you add to what they've said, or how would you differ from what they're saying?
We already did. We have a plan. And this is exactly what we're trying to propose to the world. So a plan for our country. We're having a World Cup in 5 years, so we need to raise our standard in health services and transport services, and we are going this way to be world-class at this level and to be able to host you all in 5 years in the best condition, organizing the best World Cup ever. And we have a plan. So our best partners to answer your questions for this event will be Spain and Portugal, because we are co-organizing this with them. We have a plan to double our trade. We are exporting $60 billion a year. We have a plan to double our trade within these 5 years. So our partners are the world, and we will find wherever we can have someone buying our goods, and wherever we can invest to provide them the goods they need and the services they need. So our partners are the world. And we have a plan for Atlantic Africa and Sahelian Africa, which is a comprehensive plan. You heard about the gazoduct between Nigeria and Morocco. It's a plan. It's a plan not only to transport energy, it's a plan to provide electricity for the people around that are crossed by this pipeline. It's a plan to provide industry and transformation and add value, because with electricity, with energy, you can add value to your product. It's a plan to increase food security within this country, mixing it with phosphate and getting ammoniac from this gas will provide fertilizer and will increase yield of the fields. So it's a comprehensive plan, and we have a 500 billion plan for this Atlantic initiative to open to all Sahel country the doors to trade with the world through the port of Dakhla, which is not only a corridor, it's value added, it's peacekeeping in this region. So we have a plan, and I'm happy to see that.
One of the projects we're working on is actually an ammonia plant for OCP.
Great. So I think in summary, what the minister has eloquently put the case for every country to do its own homework, have its own plan, be ready to act. The other panelists today have talked about what the partners on the other side from the international could look like. I know we're pretty much at time, but if I'm allowed, I'd like to just take a couple of very short comments from the audience. So not statements, but just a very quick couple of reflections. So back there.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Zainab Osman. I'm the director of the Africa program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. I'll try to make this very, very quickly. To Mr. Franco from the World Bank, I'm just wondering where hydrocarbons and mineral resources are within the bank's evolving strategy. And I ask this question because, as you know, for African countries, many of them are resource-rich. At least 25 African countries can be considered resource-rich. At least 10 are veteran oil producers. I can go on and on. But for the longest time, the World Bank was not engaged in this sector at all, because in 2018, President Jim Kim declared at the One World Summit in Paris that the bank would exit financing of oil and gas upstream. And then the board members, all of them, the US, the European countries were very adamant against any extractives projects. And I ask this question because I used to work in that division, and we could not get any project technical assistance, not to mention any kind of financing to the board.
Brilliant, thank you, Zainab.
Yes, so
I'm going to take that as an item for the Mo Ibrahim Foundation to take forward, a focus on critical minerals and resources on the continent. Then I have another comment here.
Thank you very much. So Abdou Diop, I'm here representing the Moroccan private sector as vice president of the private sector. I think one thing I didn't hear, and which is very important, is how we make global finance work for, when we say for Africa, it's also for African SMEs. And I think that there's a part that is missing in all this financing. It's financing SMEs. BOAD does it well, but still 95% of our private sector is SMEs, and I think all these organizations don't know how to work with SMEs, and it's an important point. The second point I didn't hear also is when we say mobilizing domestic finance, is also mobilizing remittances. And I think that today there is something to do with all these remittances coming in Africa to see how to mobilize it to development project and to go in the continent. And I think also that all of your organizations are not working enough on that. The third point is about integration and global value chain. I think we are still focusing on countries. Or today, if we want really FTA work and also things move forward, we need to be more global and focus on integration projects, regional integration project, and financing value chain. And the last point is about how it's working. It's really good that EBRD is trying to open offices in countries, but in the same time, it raises the amount of money with many overheads. So we need to see how to be more efficient on that point. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. And that serves as a last advertisement for the fantastic fact book that has been given to every one of you. The 4 issues that you've raised, including remittances, value chains, global finance, and SMEs, are all beautifully covered in that book that the foundation team so carefully put together. So I want to finish the panel by asking you to join me, not just in thanking the brilliant panelists today, but also thanking the foundation team for putting such a terrific founding document that's made these conversations so rich. So join me in thanks.